Hello, everybody. We start public meeting saying we are seeking tonight a lively and friendly atmosphere that is non-racist, sexist or homophobic, or where any other type of oppression is expressed. In fact, we think it's really very important now to unite all workers, racist victims, and all oppressed groups, and that it's impossible unless we fight oppression everywhere, whether in Palestine, Colombia, Chile, the United Kingdom, Europe, or Asia. The ISL is an internationalist and Marxist group, part of the International Workers' League, Fourth International. And here we are discussing the Paris Commune and what is useful today for all our national and international struggles for the IWL, for the working class of the world. You can find us on Facebook and on the IWL website. We're always happy to discuss. There are 28 people in this meeting, and there'll be plenty of time for discussion after the contributions. We invited Michael Lenoir to speak tonight on the Paris Commune. He has PowerPoint slides that will take 30 minutes. And we have Sarah Khalid from Mainat Kash Tariq, the workers' movement of Pakistan, on the role of women in the Paris Commune for 15 minutes. We think this is very important because the impact of the Paris Commune, 150 years later, we can say, long live the Paris Commune, and discuss what lessons there are for across the world. Michael was part of the Yellow Vest movement and involved in the big strike of transport workers and many others. And when, before COVID, he invited us to France to meet and discuss with movements, we agreed immediately. But COVID put a stop to these travels for the moment. After Michael and Sarah have spoken, we have questions and contributions. Each one should be about 3 minutes. Please remember that for Michael and Sarah, English is a second language, and tonight there are many different accents of English. In addition to the ISL members, we have IWL members from Belgium and Brazil. We welcome the African team, which is 6 people here, who are working with the international from the Congo, South Africa, and so on. And there are students and activists here from Liverpool and a number of other cities as well. There is a chat area, so please indicate you'd like to speak, put your questions and points there, but we will ask you to say the same thing, so that the Michael and Sarah can understand exactly what the question is. So if you can do that, that'd be very helpful. That the Paris Commune has lessons for today is for us, no doubt. But what exactly are they for a world that sees such barbarism as a world ravaged by COVID, a true genocide by capitalism that is killing millions of people, or the repeated economic crisis, the terrible increase in poverty across the world, but also at the same time, mass uprisings, revolutionary struggles, such as in Colombia, the USA, and Chile, and we think many more are coming. The birth of the Paris Commune marked the first time in history when the working class took political power directly into its own hands. Karl Marx at the time described it as the new point of departure of worldwide significance. Is that still the case today? Let's hear from Michael and then Sarah. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. Next.
Right, here we go.
Okay, so in the first part, I'll focus on some key facts about the Paris Commune, and then we'll try to understand why things happened the way they did and whether it could have been different. So we'll start with the situation in March 1871. Next. Let's go back to December 1851, when Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, so the nephew of the first emperor, made a coup d'etat and became the second one. He established a very authoritarian regime, which allowed the capitalist class to get rich quickly at that time. So the Second Empire would last for about less than 20 years. Heavy industry, particularly railways, developed strongly in France. Financial speculation also grew quickly. In the 1850s, the bourgeoisie was very happy and made huge profits. In the 1860s, however, the capitalist machine started to seize up. The growth and profit rates decreased, and thus, towards the end of the 1860s, the upper class distanced itself from the regime. At the same time, the so-called liberal empire became slightly less repressive, but no less corrupt. For instance, worker strikes were now partly allowed and multiplied. The emperor's reaction was to engage in a military headlong rush, trying to recreate a fictitious unity around the regime. Next. Trying to show his muscles and probably convinced that the French army was invincible, he declared war on Prussia on the 19th of July, 1870. So very soon, the French army showed that it was unprepared and suffered a series of defeats, leading to the so-called disaster of Sedan near the Belgian border. And about 100,000 men army was trapped and surrendered, and the emperor was taken prisoner by Chancellor Bismarck. That was the end of the Second Empire. However, the war was not over. Next. On the 4th of September, the news of the surrender was known, and so the Republican people took to the streets of big cities, in Lyon and Marseille, and in Paris, where the crowd invaded the National Assembly. Republican deputies from Paris then proclaimed themselves the government of national defense, while appointing General Trochu, a royalist, as its head. Yet there were Republicans and Republicans, the bourgeois Republicans, opponents of the empire, but defenders of capitalist interests, and the radical Republicans who were in the majority in 1870 Paris, and who spoke of a universal republic or a democratic and social republic. But the Prussian army soon arrived around Paris. On the 19th of September, 1870, the siege of Paris began. Illusions about the Republican defenders were strong on the 4th of September, but gradually disappeared, and the Republican people understood that the government did not want to fight to drive out the Prussians and was rather thinking of capitulating. With the arrival of winter, with the arrival of winter, the polar cold came to be added to the hunger. In Paris at that time, one ate rat, cat, and dog. And the people's anger grew with their suffering. There were 2 failed attempts at popular insurrection in Paris on the 31st and 22nd of January. Okay, that's the right slide now. The government of national defense, which had never believed in victory, signed an armistice with Germany. In fact, German national unity was proclaimed in occupied Versailles on the 18th of January, 1871. Bismarck agreed to a peace treaty, but with certain conditions. He wanted 5 billion gold francs in war damages. Alsace and Moselle, so northern Lorraine, were to become German, and he wanted to sign a peace treaty with a legitimate government. So he demanded elections in France. So there were elections very quickly without political debate, and despite the occupation of about a third of France by German troops. And the result of that was on the 8th of February, an ultra-reactionary assembly, mostly royalist, which appointed Thiers as prime minister. So the reactionary majority wanted a peace treaty with Bismarck at all costs. And this was an insult to the sufferings and resistance of the Parisian people, who were also very worried about the probability of royalist restoration with such a chamber. Very quickly, Thiers and the assembly made choices which insulted and hit the working people of Paris. First, the assembly, initially installed in Bordeaux, was to move on the 30th of March, on the 20th of March, not to Paris, but to Versailles. So that was the capital of kings. So it was a symbol insulting the Republican feelings of Paris. Then Bismarck obtained from Thiers the right to march through Paris with German troops. This was a provocation to the Parisian people as well. And so it was decided to limit the access of the German soldiers to only part of Western Paris from the 1st to the 3rd of March. Yet the German troops paraded on the Champs-Élysées, as you can see here. Finally, the government financially attacked the starving Parisian people. Late payments of commercial drafts had to be settled within 48 hours. Late rents had to be paid to. The 1 franc 50 per day paid to the National Guardsmen was subject to a condition of indigence. All this at a time when economic activity in Paris had not resumed. Next. This is when the Cannon Affair took place on the 18th of March, 1871. Next. To understand what happened, it is necessary to capture both the class hatred and the fear that the upper class felt against the people of Paris, because the latter were armed too. Since the French Revolution, there had been the tradition reactivated during the war and the Prussian siege of the National Guard, a popular militia. In March 1871, in Paris, it comprised 300,000 men, representing essentially the workers and other popular categories, and fiercely Republican. In addition, the National Guard had federated. They were called the Federals, and they did that by setting up elections by the basis of delegates by company, then at the level of the battalions, then at the level of all Paris with a central committee of the National Guard. All elected members at all levels were irrevocable. On the 15th of March, the first central committee was elected. It was what we would call today self-organization, and it frightened Thiers and the bourgeoisie, who wanted to do away with what they called the Republican scoundrels. This National Guard had cannons and machine guns, partly purchased during the siege by popular subscription. A real dual power, embodying the proletariat and the popular classes, armed, thus existed in front of the bourgeois institutions. However, some of these weapons had remained in the part of Paris where the German troops were to march. So the National Guard had to put them in a safe place, and they did it so in Montmartre and Eastern Paris. Thiers decided in the Council of Ministers on the 17th of March to seize the cannons and arrest the Red leaders of the National Guard. He sent 15,000 line soldiers, mainly to the hill of Montmartre and to Eastern Paris. The operation took place the following night. Next. But the attack backfired. To bring the cannons down from Montmartre, carriages and horses were needed, which did not arrive. Meanwhile, at dawn, the women of Montmartre went out and stopped in front of these soldiers. Understanding the situation, many of them encouraged the soldiers to disobey. As the crowd became denser, General Lecomte gave the order to shoot at them without success, and a reverse order, rifle butt up, was given. And the line soldiers fraternized with the women and the population of Montmartre who had run to the scene, as well as the few National Guardsmen present. Similar scenes of fraternization took place elsewhere in Paris. General Lecomte and his colleague Clément Thomas were arrested and then later shot by angry soldiers. Thus, a totally spontaneous insurrection took place, and the people poured into the street and avenues, building barricades. Later in the day, the Central Committee took the lead and decided to move to the Hôtel de Ville. In the meantime, Thiers had ordered his government and all administrations to leave Paris and take refuge in Versailles. In the evening, the Central Committee of the National Guard occupied the Hôtel de Ville. Paris seemed to have changed owners. Next. From the next day, the Central Committee was faced with crucial choices. First of all, what to do with Thiers and his people who had fled to Versailles? Pursue them or do nothing? The Central Committee decided to do nothing, despite some interventions in favor of a military offensive. The questions the question was very political. The majority of the Central Committee wanted to strictly stick to their mandate, which was to fight thoroughly to protect Paris against the Germans and to defend the Republic. It was therefore decided to elect a commune in Paris very quickly. To do this, legally if possible, contact was made with the mayors of the districts and Republican deputies of Paris. But this took time because the elected representatives wanted a conciliation between Paris and Versailles. But Thiers did not want that. The elections were finally set for the 26th of March, and on the 28th, the commune was proclaimed before hundreds of thousands. Elsewhere in France, Republican cities such as Lyon, Marseille, and others made attempts to set up communes, but they lacked the revolutionary steam that was superabundant in Paris. By early April, through repression and dislocation, these attempts were over. Next. Okay, let's see now what the Paris Commune was and what it did. Next. First, let's take a look at the composition of the communal council elected on the 26th of March. I think it's not the right slide, is it? Okay. Of the 92 members initially elected, just over 70 agreed to serve. About 30 of them were workers. And there were also small shopkeepers, craftsmen, and liberal professions, journalists, doctors, lawyers, etc., who were known for their defense of the Republic. Ideologically, there were several currents, but no real parties. The workers were still very influenced by the doctrine of Proudhon, who had died in 1865, which meant opposition to the state in favor of federalism and little interested in strategy. In contrast, the Blanquists fought in terms of military apparatus, seizing power, and revolutionary dictatorship, but gave little thought to the socialist project. The largest group of them were the neo-Jacobins, who referred a lot to the French Revolution and wanted to complete it, faithful to the ideals of Robespierre. And there was the IWA, the International Working Men's Association, or First International, that had been founded in London with Marx in 1864 and had grown a lot in recent years in France, notably by participating in strikes and by organizing solidarity. But the IWA was a broad group of workers, not really a party in today's sense. And inside the IWA itself, there was a strong Proudhonist influence, and one could find some Blanquists too. With the Commune, all elected representatives were revocable by their electors, and the Commune decided to limit their income to 6,000 francs per year, an average worker's salary. So the links with the working people were multiple. By an abundant communal press, by the clubs very present everywhere, particularly in working class districts, and by the Republican and Socialist vigilance committees present in the 20 arrondissements, the Paris districts. Next, as Marx explained, the main merit of the Commune was to exist. In 72 days, the revolution took emergency measures, but had not real time to carry out major reforms. The Commune decided to abolish the permanent army and the police. These functions were to be performed by the National Guard. Among the emergency measures were the extension of the moratorium on rents and trade deadlines, and the extension of the 1.50 franc pay of the National Guardsmen. Certain measures were taken to specifically defend workers. Wage deductions were banned. Baking workers were freed from night work, and workshops abandoned by their owners were handed over to workers' collectives, kind of unions. Some reforms were longer term and were partly taken up later, notably by the separation of church and state, or free compulsory secular education for boys and girls, even if the educational project of the communists had nothing to do with the bourgeois Republican schools set up 10 years later. And in education, men and women, for the first time, were paid by the Commune, received the same salary for the first time. Next. The big problem is that the civil war had already started on the 18th of March, and it continued and hardened. On the 2nd of April, the Versaillais took Courbevoie west of Paris. Their barbarism, with summary executions of prisoners, revolted the Commune and the Parisians, who on the 3rd and 4th of April decided to go and attack Versailles. But this attack, unprepared and based on a poor evaluation of reality, encountered stronger and more numerous Versailles troops than expected, and was a failure, which killed many communists and demoralized many others. The sound of the Versailles cannon began to be heard more and more frequently in Paris, destroying an increasing number of buildings. And the Versailles troops gained ground by seizing the fortifications a few kilometers around Paris, and then by digging trenches towards the city. The military question was crucial. The balance of power, initially very favorable to Paris, was reversed, and financing the civil war cost 3/4 of the meager resources of the Commune recovered from the Banque de France. Next. This leads us to what is called Bloody Week. Next. When the final Versailles offensive began, the balance of power had been reversed. On the one side, 130,000 soldiers from Versailles, on the other one, 15 to 20,000 communards in arms. On the 21st of May, the Versailles troops entered Paris from the southwest. They very quickly deployed throughout the bourgeois west of Paris. The defenders of the Commune quickly regrouped around barricades and in their own neighborhoods. But the advance of the Versailles troops was brutal and rapid, and they pushed back the communists on an ever narrower area in the northeast of Paris. Many buildings were destroyed. Multiple fires ravaged the city, some because of the bombardments, or lit to protect the communists, or out of desperation too. On the 28th of May, the last barricade was taken by the Versaillais. Next. Bloody Week was an abominable butchery. The number of dead communists is still under debate and will never be known. It fluctuates between 6,500 for anti-communist historians to 100,000. I think a more realistic number often cited seems to be between 17 and 25,000 men, women, and children. There were summary executions in many, many places of Paris. Bodies were found by the thousand in mass graves. The assassins only stopped the killings for fear of epidemics, the plague in particular. But Thiers and others said that the communists had to expiate their sins. This is why the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the Sacré-Cœur, was built in Montmartre. Next. Nearly 40,000 communists, or supposed so, were arrested and put on trial before councils of war, but only a little over 10,000 were condemned, which makes more than 25,000 arrests and trials, ending in dismissals or acquittals. 93 people were sentenced to death, of which 23 actually executed. There were several thousand prison sentences, and about 4,500 were sent to the penal colony in New Caledonia. That was Louise Michel's case, the picture here. A few hundred or thousand succeeded in going into exile, chiefly in England and Switzerland. The amnesty was only completely granted in 1880. Next. Now, let's try to draw a few lessons from these historic events. Next. The first lesson is the power of spontaneous mass action. No one had planned an insurrection on the 18th of March, and yet it happened by fraternization, almost without bloodshed. Second lesson, with the National Guard, the people were in arms, and this, of course, facilitated fraternization. Not at all sure that it would have taken place without arms on the workers' side. Third lesson, the key role of women, but I leave this to Sarah, who will speak after me. Next. However, next. Okay. Lessons must also be learned from the tragic end of the Commune. Was it fatal or due to mistakes, and why? Next. No, just before that. Okay. In fact, one can. Okay, one must be careful. There were two key things in particular in terms of mistakes. One must be careful because this may lead to fictional history, and that wouldn't be good. But let's ask ourselves the following questions. First, one must ask whether the flight of Thiers and his followers to Versailles and the subsequent reinforcement of the army of order was fatal. In fact, Thiers, as early as 1848, had advised in case of insurrection the departure of the government to Versailles and the counterattack after its reorganization. He never hid his intention to rebuild a reliable, disciplined army far from the Commune propaganda and subject only to Versailles brainwashing. And so he did. He quickly got Bismarck to release French soldiers he was holding prisoners. Was it then possible to chase Thiers and others? If so, what would have happened? That's a question. Secondly, there is the case of the Banque de France. While all the administrations had fled to Versailles, Paris had to insure certain expenses, in particular the pay of National Guardsmen. The bank was blocked in Paris due to the impossibility of moving its stocks of gold, safes, etc. But they had about 3 billion francs in various forms. Both Versailles and Paris received money from the bank, but the former about 15 times more than the latter, and to destroy the latter. In fact, most of those at the Commission of Finances and the delegate to the Banque de France wanted to abide by the law. For them, the bank was not reserved for Paris alone by virtue of the communist federalism. It was above all a question of ideology. Militarily, it would have been easy for the National Guard to seize the bank. It would be most interesting to discuss these two issues, I think. Next. Just one. But there were other mistakes and problems. One probably being the insufficient attention paid to the relationship with the provinces and its major cities. Certainly, it was very difficult for Paris to communicate with the provinces at that time. Anyway, it remained isolated, which made Thiers' task much easier. But the military issue also played an important role. Certainly, there were some high-quality military leaders, such as Polish General Dąbrowski here. The people and many National Guardsmen were heroic, yet there were always major tensions between the Communal Council and the Central Committee of the National Guard. The Commune had great difficulty in finding a national delegate to the war, and it appointed 3, and there were always problems. In the National Guard, there was a real lack of discipline, but also of organization. For instance, many guardsmen on the ramparts of Paris were never relieved for weeks on end. Finally, the defense of Paris during Bloody Week was totally disorganized. Everyone withdrew to their own neighborhood and barricade without any coordination, which of course favored the advance of the Versailles troop. Next. So the lessons were often drawn later by some survivors of the Commune and by Marx and his successors, particularly with the question of a revolutionary party. Yes, okay, right here. If we consider only the 2 main issues mentioned above, the flight to Versailles and the Banque de France, we see that, before that, please. Okay, right. We see that the insurgents were just caught off guard. They did not know what to, oh, sorry, that's the next one. Just to be in time. Yeah. Next. Forward. Next. All right. Okay. So So just for the two issues mentioned here, the flight to Versailles and the Banque de France, we see that the insurgents were just caught off guard. They didn't know what to do. So this led the Marxists, especially the Bolsheviks later, to point out that the Parisian workers in 1871 solely lacked a revolutionary party. Trotsky wrote in 1921, "The Commune shows us the heroism of the working masses, their capacity to unite in a single bloc, their gift for self-sacrifice in the name of the future, but it shows us at the same time the incapacity of the masses to choose their path, their indecision in the direction of the movement, their fatal inclination to stop after the first successes, thus allowing the enemy to regain his position." Isn't it what happened? And what kind of party is he speaking about? The Workers' Party for Trotsky, the real one, is not a machine for parliamentary maneuvers. It is the accumulated and organized experience of the proletariat. It is only with the help of the party, which relies on the whole history of its past, which theoretically foresees the path of development, all the stages, and extracts from them the formula of the necessary action, that the proletariat frees itself from the necessity of always starting over its history, its hesitations, its lack of decision, its mistakes. The Paris proletariat did not have such a party. Next. The errors committed are indeed the result of the absence of such a party, understood as both then an organizer of action and the memory of the history of the class struggle, synthesizing all its lessons. The Communal Council was openly divided, particularly after the 1st of May. The tendencies, Proudhonists, Blanquists, and Neo-Jacobins, disappeared after 1871 and have not really been reincarnated afterwards. But what made the strength of one current then was often cancelled out by the weaknesses of another, and vice versa. And that was dramatic. As for the IWA, it was a broad grouping without political and ideological unity and without a coherent revolutionary program. Charles Bellet, the delegate to the Banque de France, a former entrepreneur, was part of it. Next. But the absence of a revolutionary party is due to the limitations existing at that time. Firstly, capitalism at that time was still in a competitive phase, and the majority of Parisian workers worked in small workshops, even very small. There were only 2 metallurgical factories in Paris with more than 1,000 employees. Workers were often very qualified, unlike many proletarians of the 20th century. The distance between the worker and the artisan boss was close, and this did not facilitate awareness of the true nature of capitalism. There were about 500,000 workers in Paris and around 140,000 bosses, but 60% of these bosses worked on their own or with no more than one employee. Hence, the strong influence of Proudhon, who was in favor of the market. However, there had been many strikes against the pressure on wages, etc., a few years earlier. But above all, the programmatic and strategic debates in the workers' movement were still in their infancy. The workers had not had enough time to reflect on the private ownership of the means of production, on the need to expropriate the capitalists, hence the majority's choice not to seize the Banque de France. The question of the state and the class nature of the army had not been seriously debated. Hence, the constant military reinforcement of the Versaillais left free to organize. The class enemy, with his nature, his thinking, his will, his way of acting, all of this had not been analyzed systematically, at least on a sufficient scale. Marxism was still very weak in the French workers' movement. Thus, a revolutionary workers' party did not exist in 1871. But the time was hardly suitable. The question would be, what about today? Next. Now, thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to all present in this meeting. I am Sarah Khalid from Pakistan, Minakash Tahrir. Hope all of you will be fine. And now I'm just ready to present my topic. which is the women's role in Paris Commune. As Rosa Luxemburg said, the most revolutionary thing one can do is always to proclaim loudly what is happening. And before understanding what is going in the present, it is very important to know about the past, about the history, about the past experiences, which are good or bad. Then let's start. As all of we know that in all great revolutions, women played the crucial role, and especially when we talk about the Paris Commune, we can't forget the women efforts and their role in Paris Commune, during which they raised issues of women's social and political rights. The Commune began with the day of high drama in the working class neighborhoods of Paris on March 18. It is one of the most inspiring episodes in the entire history of the working class. In just a few weeks, surrounded by enemies, the working men and women of Paris demonstrated with brilliance that it is possible for the workers to run society democratically without capitalists, bankers, or even any standing army. As the birth of Commune on 18 March, we see that it was a working woman of Montmartre who disarmed the reactionary journals by fraternizing with the troops. And in the Commune's dying hours, a woman could be seen at very barricaded, arms in hand, fighting for their class. Women's role in the Paris Commune was not limited to the morning of March 18, when a crowd of working class women put themselves between the cannons in the possessions of the National Guard and the troops of the National Assembly, which was led by Adolphe Thiers. The action this sparked the revolution. Throughout the 72 days reign of the Commune, women organized, argued, theorized, and fought alongside men to defend and develop the revolution. From the beginning to the end, women were actively involved in the Commune, although they were not allowed to vote for public office. There were major participants in the events of March 18, debated issues, created vigilance committees, demanded better education for girls, better pay for women, manufactured ammunition and uniforms for the National Guards, risked their lives as nurses and cooks on the battlefields, helped construct defensive barricades throughout the city, and fought alongside men in the final battle against the Versailles army in May. We say that women were avid participants in the nightly debates, speaking from the pulpits in the churches where the clubs met. They denounced that the enemies of the revolution, who for them were the wealthy, the religious priests and the nuns especially, and men who shrank from defending the city in the National Guard. They called for the establishment of the social republic, political rights for women, pensions for National Guard widows, whether legally married or not, on the legalization of divorce. When we especially look on the history and the focus on the woman role in the Paris Commune, and we see that the difficult time, that was the difficult time for the woman, especially it was typically for the woman to work for 13 hours, 6 days a week. Even still, the wages she received for that work were woefully shy of the cost of living at that time. Even if her wages were added to her husband's. This contradiction drove many working women to prostitution. The Franco-Prussian War put further strain on the French people, particularly during the month-long siege of Paris, when they were completely blocked off from the outside. This led to soaring inflation and to long lines to get bread. That was securely. It was primarily the women who had to stand in these lines and literally fight for the bread needed for their families. And this led the basic for the militancy that was seen among the women during the Commune, who led the charge on many occasions. Women whom role in Paris Commune we need to discuss are Deloise Michael, Elizabeth, Andre Liu, Annie Jackler, Paul Ming, and Nathalie Lemel organized. They were organized ambulances, services, and work cooperatives, as well as taking up arms for the revolution. The working women of the commune fought for women's rights on the class basis and defended the revolution with their very lives. These were militant women fighting for the gains of the working class in the Paris Commune. So, Andrew, just we know about that, and they all believed in the equality of the men and women. We see that the Leo used the paper to argue that women were as willing as men to sacrifice themselves for the revolution. They criticized and commune's leaders for their failure to accept women's armed participation and warned that women would turn against the revolution if they were not allowed to help. Then Leo escaped to Switzerland. After that, we see that she returned to France in General Ministry in 1880. And the second, I want to discuss about the Elizabeth and the Union, which was the founder of the Union de Femmes also. And she was a young Russian radical on that time, and she was also the friend of Karl Marx, which functioned as a women's section of the French branch of the International. After meeting with other working women active in the commune, she saw the need to organize the working women of Paris to defend the commune at the barricades, ambulance stations, and the canteens, as well as the fight for the socialist measures and that would emancipate working women from exploitation. This led to the setting up of the workers' union, which named the Union Defense. And the first meeting of the union took place on the, I think so, April 11, and after an appeal to the, and she appeals to the women citizens of Paris, was put up on the walls. They put the banners on the walls on the city and published in the papers. A provisional central committee was appointed, which included Elizabeth and 7 other women workers also. This union also fought for the working women of the Paris Commune by demanding equal pay for the women, the right to divorce, education for girls, and much more. They also fought to end the distinction between the legitimate and illegitimate children. The pensions and the widow rights, all these points were added on that time. Orphans were to receive an education. They also focused on that orphans must need to receive the quality education at the expense of the commune. In short, many measures were enacted that benefited the working women of Paris directly. Lois Michael, she was also the very active woman on that time in Paris Commune, who became the most famous female revolutionary of the 19th century. She was everywhere during the Commune. We can when we just talk about the history of the Paris Commune, we see that her efforts and her struggle we can see everywhere. She was present on the Montmartre on March 18, especially on that day. She participated in the nightly debates about public policy, ran a school for girls. She was the teacher also, and her mother both were running, or that time they were running the school, and became the great female warrior on the Commune, alternatively fighting at the enemy and helping the wounded.
Sarah, there's 5 minutes. Sorry. 5 minutes left. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. No, sorry. Carry on for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. May I carry on?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. 5 minutes
Left.
That you've got left.
Okay, 5 minutes left. Okay. I'm just going to sum up after some time. Okay, and after we see that during the Bloody Week that destroyed the Commune, as many as 25,000 Parisians were killed by the army, and over 40,000 were taken prisoner, including 1,051 women. The government believed on that time for women were guilty of defending the Commune, but it couldn't find them. In the end, the 168 women were tried and punished. Some of men who were guilty were also executed on that time. We think that as a Marxist, we fight for any reforms that help working women, while at the same time explaining that the only way to fully emancipate women is to abolish capitalism, because the capitalist class have always had the policy of divide and rule on grounds of race or sex, in order to more successfully exploit the working class as a whole. The achievements of the working women of the Paris Commune cannot be overlooked when discussing women's issues. And today we see also that women's protests often lead to effective mass movements. Uh, mm, uh, and now we say that women in the large numbers are mobilizing. When we are talking about the present and the past efforts of the women, we see that now women are in the large number of mobilizing in the different revolutionary struggles and protests. And we have a lot of militant women also, active members who are struggling and fighting in all over the world. We have a lot of members, but here we have just names which I think is very necessary to speak, whom are active and fighting for the basic rights of the women and the other issues present in the society, in their areas, in their regions, in their groups. I just want to tell the names of these are Janet Bennett, and I think she is from Liverpool, Adriana Santos from Brazil, Margaret from ISL, and Kelly, she's a student nurse, and I also worked with her in the on the first May rally presentation. She touched with me also, and Mariam from Liverpool. As Martin, you said that she's very actively participating in Palestinian movement right now. And a lot of women which are still working, very actively working in BLM and BSTU and so on. Or I think so. I think so that women participation in any movement is really very important to highlight the movement or to gain the success of any special movement which we are facing in the different areas. So thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate if you stick with me. Thank you, Martin.